everybody, this video is going to go over assignment number 2, the expectations for assignment number 2, which is the first part of your program proposal. This assignment is due formally in week 4, Sunday of week 4, but the first draft will be due in week 3 of your discussion forum. So I'm going over it now so you can get started and be prepared for this week's discussion forum post. So, as I mentioned, this will be part 1 of your program proposal. This is a 3-part assignment and a 3-part program proposal. So this section will be 3 parts of the proposal. First will be the statement of need, the logic model, and the goals and objectives. It's going to be very important to make sure you complete the reading. Chapter 15 in Brody and Nair and Chapter 8 in Kettner will really give you a strong foundation for being able to complete this assignment. As I mentioned again, this week, in week number 3, you will be submitting a draft of part 1 of your program proposal into the discussion forum for feedback. And it is due, the final draft is due Sunday of week number 4. For this assignment, there will also be a template provided for you. It is in the Engage system. You're going to use that template to craft each one of the sections and also to submit it. So the purpose of this assignment, as I mentioned, there are 3 components: statement of need, logic model, and your goals and objectives for the assignment. These 3 components lay out the framework and building blocks for your whole program. It addresses the need that you've established that's unmet and that your program will address. It also justifies the idea behind your program, what you're asking for them to fund. The goals and objectives will establish the map for what your program's work is aiming to achieve. And the logic model will provide the general structure of the project. And we're going to go over each of these things in greater detail. Part of this assignment is being able to identify unmet needs that your organization could address through a new program or solution proposal. It's important to always keep in mind what exactly the client's needs are. As we make proposals that could benefit the organization, we want to make sure that the needs that are the center of our focus for creating new programs are actually needs that are being expressed in different ways by the clients that we serve, and that we're always justifying and supporting those needs as we create new programs. We don't want to be organizations that create programs that address political whims or funding desires. We want to make sure that our programs are actually meeting the needs of people, and those needs sometimes change, and so our task is to be constantly looking for ways to identify gaps in service, needs that are not being met, and come up with innovative solutions to those. So our readings this week demonstrate a few different types of need, and it's important to kind of distinguish between these types of need because each one indicates different types of data that would be used to justify or establish or define that need. The first type is normative need. This is a need established by data provided by an authority, by custom, or consensus. So this is kind of a widely established criteria that defines the need. This might be an agency's assessment or data produced by a formal study or a community's own assessment. An example that I'll be using throughout this video is about establishing services or improving the services, improving the condition of the fact that there are a lot of homeless families in Baltimore City. So an example of a normative need with this example in mind would be perhaps that Baltimore City has identified a number of chronically homeless families, and so it would be the actual data about the number of homeless families experiencing homelessness in Baltimore City. Also, data that's established by the school system and the public health system that highlights poor outcomes of children experiencing homelessness. So between the number of identified chronically homeless families and the data about what poor outcomes they experience as a result of homelessness, one could look at unmet needs for that population. Perceived needs are what people think or feel their needs to be. So this would be looking at what a community experiences as their own needs and how they define that process. You could look at data on this around community surveys or social media, ways that a particular community is expressing their own needs. Expressed needs are needs for which consumers have sought solutions or attempted to obtain services. You can see express needs through demand statistics. So these are things like wait lists, unfulfilled applications, petitions. These are things like the number of homeless families does not match the number of available shelter beds or case management program slots, whatever the case may be, and so there's a resulting wait list. So if there are more people seeking a particular service than there is available, the service is available to provide, one could assume that the express need is more space in these programs, more capacity within these programs. And then a relative need is the gap between the level of services that exist in one community and the level of those services in similar communities or geographic areas. So if Philadelphia is addressing the issue of homeless families in very innovative ways, and they have comparable statistics and they have comparable demographics, and they are experiencing different outcomes, more positive outcomes for working with homeless families and reducing homelessness among families, then Baltimore could look at that, look at their numbers, look at their population, and look at the gap between what each city is achieving versus what they're putting into it and identify unmet needs in that way. As you prepare your statement of need, you'll look at 3 distinct sections. The first part will be the introduction. This is going to be one solid paragraph in which you'll answer all of the questions provided for you in the template. You're going to address all of these together. It's going to summarize your overall program need that is being addressed. In the empirical evidence section, you will begin to justify the need for your program and the manner in which you're attempting to address it. There's going to be 4 main questions, which we'll go over in just a few minutes, and 4 sub-questions listed in the template. You're going to address all of the questions thoroughly and concisely, and you're going to do this in 2 to 4 paragraphs. You need to be able to provide some explanation and some justification, but also keep it brief and within the length constraints provided by the template. You will want to definitely use reliable sources for any empirical evidence that you are providing. So be aware of national advocacy organizations, other studies that have already been done, established data from programs similar to the one you're proposing if that exists, empirical evidence provided about the need itself. And then finally, the third section is organizational context. And this is where you will respond to 1 main question and 2 sub-questions in 1 to 3 paragraphs about the organization itself and what makes the organization appropriate to address this need. So, in the introduction section of the statement of need, you will begin to describe the need and the proposed solution, and you're going to be summarizing basically both in this section. So, how can you concretely define the unmet need or condition or problem? What does your organization want to change? What specifically is your organization aiming to change about this unmet need or problem? Who will be served and how will they benefit? Who specifically is the target population of this program and how specifically will they benefit? You want to be as specific as possible and also keeping in mind the relationship between the unmet need, what your organization wants to address about that, who they target in order to promote that change, and what the expected benefit of participating in this program will be. So for the empirical evidence section, you're going to address the following questions. What is the etiology of the condition? So how did this problem begin? Where are the roots? Is there traceable history to this problem and how it developed and how it came to be today? You want to look for that information because sometimes addressing any historical roots to a problem can be important in establishing efforts that have been tried before and where your program may be innovative or different, and why that's compelling to try something new. What are the causes of the problem or condition or unmet need? How widely is the condition recognized? Is this something that's emerging that only your organization has started to develop? Or is this a hot topic? Is this something that is general knowledge in the community of service providers or in the community at large? For example, right now a hot topic is looking at opioid addiction and overdoses. And so a lot of programs are being established and a lot of funding opportunities are being established to address that. It's important to be aware of how widely your issue is recognized in order to determine whether or not there are patterns, whether there's a context that you need to be aware of in order to fit into as you propose your solution. And then what are the characteristics of those who can be defined as having this condition or be the people who are affected by this unmet need? How many people are affected? How severely are people affected? In what ways are people affected? And can they be located geographically? Depending on what your organization is, it's possible that you are looking at something that's happening on a national level, again, looking at the opioid addiction epidemic. Are you looking at the way in which that's being lived out just in your community? Are you specifically looking at overdose deaths and prevention in Ohio, for example, or in Pittsburgh? You want to look at the specifics of the area that you will be targeting with your program. Then the final component of the statement of need is going to be looking at the organizational context. The main question here is what makes your organization or agency a good choice for housing and proposing the solution to the identified unmet need or problem? What makes you special, and why should a funder grant you the opportunity to create this program and work towards the solution for the need that you've identified? Here's where, if you have this information, you're going to want to include any other approaches that you've identified that the organization has used to address the problem. You might want to make note of any innovative efforts that have been established by the organization, previous programs, things that you've identified the organization is building off of in order to create this new program. You're going to want to include, as you have it and as is applicable, any information from your organizational capacity assessment. So you can use information that you created in your first assignment, the organizational capacity assessment, to highlight the strengths and opportunities of the organization as you craft your statement of need. So all three of these components together create the statement of need, and you're going to put it into the box in the template. So the next section is goals and objectives. So what is a goal? We use the word all the time, but in the context of program development, obviously it is very specific. And a goal in this context is the target or the desired accomplishment. It's going to look like a clear resolution to the problem that you've identified. This is something that is lofty. A goal is something that your organization wants to work toward. So for example, a goal for the example of the problem I mentioned earlier around family homelessness in Baltimore City is to end family homelessness in Baltimore City by 2020. It's lofty, and it's something that feels big and feels daunting that we are establishing programs and objectives to work towards. So once we've established what the goals are, we need to know what the objectives are. And objectives are measurable benchmarks on the way to obtaining your goal. What's very important to take away from this are that we want to always make the objectives SMART. So specific, measurable, attainable or realistic, relevant, time-bound. So it's important to keep these SMART objectives in mind because these are things that we want to be able to measure that we are accomplishing. As I mentioned before, the goal is loftier. The goal is something bigger that we're working towards, and we're using the objectives to kind of chart our progress towards that goal. So, for example, by July 2018, Baltimore City will complete a census of homeless families among all relevant service providers. So if our goal is to end homelessness, one of our objectives would be, in theory, to identify how many people we have that are homeless, right? So an example of an objective would be to, assuming that this didn't already exist, to completely count how many homeless families we have among all relevant service providers. And that would give us an idea of how to create other activities to work towards the next step in the plan. So what kinds of objectives are there? This is important to keep in mind as you move forward because for the assignment, you'll need to create at least 2 goals for your program and 2 objectives for each of those goals. So you want to keep in mind the different types of things you could be including as your objectives. The first one that I'll mention is impact objectives. These are outcomes that will result from specific program activities. So for example, we could look at the number of reported homeless families will decrease by 30% each year until 2020. If our overall goal is to end homelessness by 2020, then an impact objective is that the impact of the work that we are doing, so specific program activities, will result in a measurable decrease in homelessness until the attainment goal of 2020 is met. Service objectives are referring to activity or process. So this is a concrete number of services or activities provided. So for example, by July of 2018, outreach workers will conduct intake interviews with 350 homeless families. So here we're looking at a very specific finite number that we hope to achieve or that we plan to achieve through the program activities. And so those are measurable, they are workable within our work plan. Operational objectives are improvement to the general operations of the organization or program that would improve the ability of the organization to address the need that you've established. So in this example, you might look at improving the capacity of volunteers to meet a particular need, establish that employees of the organization may need training or may need development in order to better meet the need. The example that was provided here is that in the first year, 100% of made-up Family Services Organization employees will attend training on the specific needs of homeless families. So by looking at this example, one might assume that the organization is saying that in looking at the number of families that are homeless, our organization should be able to address the specific needs of those families. And maybe they've established that organizationally there's a weakness in the ability of employees to specifically meet those needs, and that by providing better training, we may be able to address homeless families in a different way or address their needs differently than we've been able to do, and that could be one of the reasons why we have not been able to address the need. And so looking at improving training may directly lead to an outcome that could work towards the goal of ending homelessness. So you still want to be able to make tie the objective of improving operations within the organization to being able to create an outcome that will lead toward the goal. And then finally, product objectives or deliverables are tangible outcomes to benefit a target population or community. So an example here would be by July 2018, Family Services Organization will develop a best practice guidelines workbook for conducting street outreach with homeless families. These are concrete things that your program will create or distribute or establish that can directly contribute to improved outcomes for this target population. So the final component of assignment number 2, the first part of your program proposal, will be the logic model. And what is a logic model? It's a diagram that demonstrates the relationship between the elements of a program and between any single element and the whole. So it's going to show how each program activity should or will lead to the desired changes, which is achieving your goals. There are various ways to produce a logic model, and it's always important to use the format that makes sense for your program and also meets the requirements of the grant proposal. It's always important to follow directions. If you are doing a grant proposal for real, in real life for your organization, you will want to make sure to use the format that is provided or suggested in the template that's provided. For our purposes, you're going to use the template that's provided through the course. A logic model should be able to demonstrate an if-then process. So if we do this, then we will see this, or this will be produced. And it's important to go through your logic model and test each of the components to see if, following the logic of your program hypothesis, it will lead to the results that you desire. So I'm going to go through the different components of the logic models, and again, it's very important to review the readings for these assignments because it goes through many different elements of the logic model that I highly recommend you familiarize yourself with. The first section is going to look at raw materials that are needed to conduct the effort or initiative. These are things like staff, volunteers, space, overhead, training manuals, participants. You're going to look at the specific things that need to be put into the program in order for it to function. Here you're also going to identify whether there are any constraints or limitations to your program. Is your program established within the framework of specific regulations that the program guidelines need to work around in order for it to function? Are there politics or political influences impacting your program's ability to function? Are there funding limitations? Does funding fluctuate? Does funding depend on certain sources? Does space impact your ability to do your program in a different way? You're going to look at all of the different raw materials and raw components that impact your ability to complete your program. The second section is activities or throughputs. So basically in the first section you had inputs of raw materials, and then looking at section 2, activities, these are the things through which you will achieve your goals. So these are things where you say, what will the program do with its resources to direct the course toward change? Specifically, what will the organization do in order to move the organization towards its goal and achieve its objectives and goals? So here are the specific things that you may do in the addressing family homelessness scenario. So the organization might decide to develop additional shelter space and address backlogs and wait lists for family shelters. You may establish a case management program for homeless families. You may conduct financial management workshops with families. You may participate in Housing First advocacy efforts. These are things that your organization is saying, if we do this, we know that it will produce these results, and if we produce these results, we will work towards our goal and we will achieve our goal in whatever time frame we've established. Once you've established the activities, the specific activities that your organization plans to take on, you're going to look at the third section, which is outputs. These are the specific results or outcomes of the activities that you've established. Here you are going to show any evidence that you expect will exist that the activities were conducted as planned. So your organization says that it's going to create a case management program for homeless families that includes financial management workshops. And you need to show that you did that and that there are outcomes as a result. So what are the concrete results of these activities? Are there any deliverables? Have you created any materials? Have you established any surveys? Have you done any work to measure the outcomes of these activities? You can also measure outputs by the frequency, duration, type, and intensity of contacts or activities. So you may look at how often contacts occur between case managers and homeless families. You may look at the type of interaction. So you may establish that case managers don't need to see their families once a week, but they need to see their families for a particular time frame whenever they do see them. So you're going to look at the specifics of your program and establish any measurements in what the output how the output may be meaningful for your program. And finally, we're leading towards the outcomes. So this is where you'll look at what kinds of changes or results are expected as a direct or indirect effect of the activities. So here is where you are getting to a little bit bigger picture. You start with raw materials, you start with what needs to go into a program, what the organization needs to do with that information or material in order to create specific activities and create the specifics of a work plan within that program. The concrete things that come out of all of those activities, and then it leads to these outcomes of what does that mean? What does it mean to have a certain number of case management contacts or a certain number of families participating in financial management workshops? What does this mean for your ability to achieve your goal? So the example that I've provided is what do we hope to achieve by conducting financial planning workshops with every head of household resident of the family shelter? And with that question, the outcome would look something like improved financial management skills of homeless heads of household as demonstrated by improved post-test results in 75% of participants. So you're looking at specific and measurable outcomes, but that are larger in quantity than just the specific number of people who participated in the program. That is an output. Now you're looking at outcomes, so kind of the cumulative effect of doing this activity. Outcomes can be measured in short-term or immediate, so perhaps the outcome looks like just for that family or the group of families that are participating that they're able to identify barriers, they're able to create family-specific housing plans. In midterm or intermediate effects, you're taking that a little bit further out and saying something like the homeless families who participate in the program will establish housing within the first year of the program. And then longer term or ultimate effects are that rates of homelessness among families in Baltimore City will continue to decrease by 30% every year until eliminated in 2020. So the goal is still elimination of homelessness by 2020. The outcome is a step closer to concrete and saying, we know that if we participate, if our organization does these activities, we will be able to reduce the rate of homelessness by 30%. How do you know if your logic model works? These are things that you definitely want to review with yourself as you prepare your logic model and as you submit it for feedback. Does it show specific measurable results that you hope to achieve by doing your program? Are the objectives that you've provided SMART? So are they specific, measurable, attainable, relevant to your goal, and time specific? Does the logic model contain a logical sequence of events? So for example, if we use A, B, and C resources, we will conduct X activity, which will produce Y results, which will produce Z outcome, which leads us toward our overall goal. You want to be able to show the direct relationship between all of those things. Have you identified raw materials that will be going into this program? And considering a diverse array of resources, so looking at financial and human capital and donations and space and other kinds of resources. You want to consider the full array of resources that are available to your program. And then does your logic model establish who is doing what and who will be responsible for what? You kind of want to have a sense going into the program of what this map is going to look like and who is going to be on this map. So if you have any questions as we move forward with this assignment, as always, please feel free to contact me and have fun creating your programs.